Hi, everybody. My name is Professor Alex, and I'm here today to talk to you about different types of groups in sociology. Since sociology is the study of social groups, we are quite specific about classifying different types of groups when we're doing research. So I'm going to go over a short PowerPoint that I made with you all. And I did just post a video on the same subject, but it's an extended version with more examples. And with this video, I'm hoping to fly through it quicker than 30 minutes. So again, types of groups in sociology, some main terminology will be group, clique, mass, aggregate, crowd, and category. A disclaimer is that when you kind of Google examples or some of the examples that I give might overlap for different terminology. This is because not so much that the definition is subjective, but what a group means to someone is, and how they perceive that group might change how they therefore categorize it. So to start off with group, the main word, a group refers to any collection of at least two people who interact with some frequency and who share some sense of aligned identity. Typically, groups consist of those who interact over long periods of times. They might have a sense of identity, and that group might have its own set of norms. So for example, students in a classroom, right? Students in a classroom do interact over a long period of time, and they share an identity in terms of being a student. And there are norms in terms of being a student and how you're supposed to behave in the classroom. Another example could be members at a church or players on a sports team. To expand on that, then we have cliques. Cliques are clusters within a group, smaller subsets of groups. So using the same examples that we did for group, although a classroom would be a group, a clique could be a friend group within that classroom. It could also, within the larger group of a church, be a Bible study, or within the larger group of a sports game, I mean, not sports game, but like if you're on a sports team, that larger team is a group that you're a part of, but you may not be friends with everybody there. So your friend, for example, like in football, there's like at least 50 people. You can't be best friends with all of them. So you might have a clique within that team of people that you actually hang out with. In terms of aggregate, this refers to a collection of people who just happen to be in the same place at the same time. There's no goal, there's no common anything really other than sharing the same space. So for example, I have a picture here of people in traffic. They don't know each other, they're not going to talk to each other, they're not going to see each other again unless for, chance they're on their way to work together and they see each other through the window. But the reality is that you don't know these people. You have nothing in common other than that you're in a car headed somewhere. Another example could be shoppers at a mall. They're all there to shop, but they don't know each other. They don't plan on interacting, and they have no common sense of identity. For crowds, crowds are temporary collections of people, but they do interact and they do influence each other, and they do also share some sort of goal. So for example, this could be, I have a picture here of people tailgating, right? It is a temporary collection of people. They're only going to be there for the day, for the afternoon, but they do interact and they do influence each other and the fun and the vibes and whatever. Like they talk to each other and they're all there to celebrate the same thing, which is their sports team that they cheer for and hopefully them winning. So they have a common goal and they have a collective where they are interacting, although it is still temporary. It gets deeper though. There's types of crowds, of course. So the first type of crowd is an acting crowd. An acting crowd, of course, is focused on some sort of action. They're focused on making change or they're focused on some sort of common goal. This could be a protest, a rally, strike, walkout, die-in, riot. Doesn't have to be that extreme, but typically people who are coming together to address a certain goal or change. A casual crowd, of course, is pretty much the opposite. These are just people who happen to be in the same place at the same time. So for example, people at the zoo looking at the giraffes or feeding the giraffes and enjoying the giraffes, right? So they don't know each other, they're never going to see each other again. They don't really share any sort of identity. They're just there casually to look at the giraffes at the zoo. When we go to conventional crowds, these are people congregating for a scheduled event, right? Like they all planned to be there and they're there. Is there, you know, a follow-up after that? No. But are they all gonna be there on that day? Yes. So for example, a concert, or again, going to a Celtics game, or even students attending a lecture. You all plan to be there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be interaction after the fact. An expressive crowd is what it sounds like, right? So it's people who gather together over common emotion. And this could be a variety of things. So this could be a political rally, right, where you feel very strongly about the cause, and therefore there is, you know, an emotional aspect there, and that you're probably sharing with other people who may be feeling the same about an issue that you care about. This could also be something as simple as a wedding, right, where you're all there and you're there to celebrate love and to be excited and positive and celebrate relationships, and so whatever, you're all kind of feeling this common excitement. But same thing with a funeral, right? That would also be an expressive crowd where you are gathering together to express emotions, whether that's grief or sadness, and you kind of do that collectively. I put concerts in question marks here because I don't know that typically a concert would be classified as an expressive crowd, but I kind of want to speak to the subjectivity of it in terms of, for me, I think that concerts are expressive crowds. Like, not, maybe not all of them, but I've been to some concerts where there is just collectively like a lot of emotion going on, and it feels almost like a spiritual experience. So again, just saying that different examples might fit into different groups for you. Use your perspective, experience, and knowledge to kind of assess that yourself. In terms of mobs, this is a type of acting crowd. And again, an acting crowd is people who are focused on a shared goal. So a mob could be, for example, people storming the Capitol, right? A mob refers to intensely emotional crowds that commit or plan to commit any sort of act of violence. Typically, mobs have leaders who are kind of pushing them towards a certain goal, but typically mobs are also spontaneous, even if you think of like a dance mob, right? I don't know how I feel about that term because a dance mob isn't ready or planning to commit violence, but it is spontaneous and may be classified as a mob. And that's where things get a little murky. But typically, when we're talking about a mob, it's something kind of like an uprising where people are emotional and possibly violent. And sometimes this is motivated by hate or fear. So again, storming the Capitol building, this was in my other video, I kind of discussed, was it spontaneous? How spontaneous? How do you define spontaneous? I don't, I would maybe classify this as spontaneous. I don't think that they planned too long about this, maybe a week or two. So spontaneous is up to you. But other examples could be lynch mobs or riots like the 1967 Detroit riot. I go more into detail about that in my other video, but I do highly recommend that you watch the film Detroit to get more insight on the process and experience of a riot. A little bit more on panics and riots. So I would say that typically panic is a prerequisite for a riot. So a panic is a sudden reaction by a crowd that involves self-destructive behavior, as when people stomp on each other. So for example, Travis Scott, right? His concert a few years ago where people were trampled over, or even more recently, I saw a video on TikTok of people at a Billie Eilish concert, and people were like screaming for help, and she couldn't hear them because, you know, they have so much music and AirPods, I don't know, earphones up there, but it's hard. I'm sure it's hard for them to hear the crowd, but they were screaming for help. And so that's a panic, right? When you're in a group and there's a lot going on, and it becomes destructive and people are freaking out, right? Another example, I have a picture here of Black Friday, right? When people get really manic about Black Friday shopping and wanting to find deals, and there have been multiple scenarios over the year where people have been injured on Black Friday. And so when a crowd is so large and out of control and in such panic, then they can develop into full-scale riots. In terms of the word mass, this one's a little bit confusing because it can be used in so many ways. People will say mass hysteria, mass movements, or mass culture. And those are all very different things. So it's hard to bring a central definition to mass. What I have is that, a mass is a large group of people who have common interests and can be mobilized for social movements. They can have collective behavior that may promote social change, whether progressively or regressively, right? So typically, seeking change through collective action. But again, this kind of goes into subgroups. So in terms of like mass hysteria, right? We have the Salem witch trials. This is people got into a collective mindset where they thought that pretty much any woman who was showing any sort of hysterics or emotion or sadness or anger or whatever deemed them a witch, right? And it was really hard to get out of, right? Like they'd be like, if you float, then they throw people in the water and be like, if you float, then you're a witch and we're gonna kill you. And if you drown, then you weren't a witch, but you're dead. And people really kind of got into this whole mentality, and it was interesting. It's definitely more of a culture bound syndrome. It was very kind of unique to Salem and surrounding areas. But yeah, people really got into the mentality that women were witches and were making big moves based off of that. You can also think about bank runs. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I'm not a historian. I don't know much about the Great Depression, but people were freaking out about, I don't know, stocks crashing or the economy crashing. So everybody kind of collectively went and withdrew their money from the banks, which I think further created the economic crisis. But I think this is interesting because I'll just bring up the fact that I was wondering, okay, would a mass be a type of crowd? But crowd, particularly in the definition, requires close proximity. So these examples, although Salem witch trials, they were in close proximity and it would still be kind of referred to as mass hysteria. Bank runs, on the other hand, these people were not in close proximity. This is people all over the country doing this, withdrawing their money from the bank because whatever, there was panic, right? And so these people weren't necessarily in close proximity. They were all over the country. Same thing with a very neutral example, which would be mass action could technically be the fact that at this moment, hundreds of thousands of people are out shopping at malls. That's technically mass action. That's a bunch of people doing the same thing at the same time, the same behavior with the same goal. So even just the fact that people are out, so many people are out shopping right now, even though they have, again, no, they're not in close proximity. They don't have a shared identity. They don't have, any sort of like shared common goal. So therefore it's a mass of people and therefore mass action. And again, for masses, they can sometimes be in close proximity, but also sometimes not. It's not a defining factor. In terms of category, this is again like more so demographics, right? Like these are people who are in the same category, but don't identify, they're not connected. They're not connected, they don't know each other. So for example, if I'm doing a study, the study right here, cell phone ownership, white versus African American in the United States, they have multiple categories here, right? Gender, age, education, household income, and then other demographics, which is, are you a parent or a student? These people don't know each other. They haven't interacted, but they do share the same category. All the people, the 200 people who are 18 to 29, like they don't know each other, but they do share the same category in the study. Some other important terminology regarding groups would be collective behavior, which is spontaneous and temporary actions of a group that emerge when traditional norms are absent. We also have mobilization, which is typically a prerequisite for a social movement. In terms of mobilization is when the group actually gathers resources and support and whatever finances that they need to be able to move towards a specific goal. Whereas the social movement is once they have mobilized and are able to organize a large group to bring about some sort of social change. I also suggest looking into reforms, resistance, and rebellion and revolution if you're curious about social movements. But here are my sources as well. I hope that that helped kind of differentiate some of the groups that we have in sociology. I know it can be a bit confusing and convoluted and a bit subjective at times in terms of examples, but I appreciate y'all hanging in there with me, and I look forward to chatting soon. Bye.